So all the blooming trees and flowers and the baby fish, huge schools of minnows, had me thinking about spring, and I broke out Bismarck for the spring again. Twice I used it. The truth is, it's still bone pain cold today in Boston, and it's a good day to start driving south, which is what I'm doing a little later when I get ready. I gotta put about one or two more things in the pickup truck and kind of arrange what's already in there for the ride. And then we're going to visit my daughter Anna in Providence on the way south, and then I'll be driving to Florida until probably, to be honest, Monday evening. Well, I mean, at the rate I'm going, I'm not going to be leaving until today evening, which is Sunday. So, God, I'll be lucky if I hope the hell I get there before Tuesday morning, because I'm supposed to be flying to Puerto Rico on Tuesday. I don't know right now off the top of my head what time. Constantly changing my flights, but I'm getting there. Getting there to be able to stay there and not have to keep coming back and forth. Until I get this house in Florida sold, and then I can figure out how I'm going to have a home in Massachusetts so that I can come back and forth. But I won't be coming back and forth as much as I have been while I've been establishing myself with this transition. So I wanted to just share something. I'm really, as you maybe can tell, really excited isn't really the right word. I'm just so grateful about our new Pope. I was very excited about Pope Francis as well. It was the first time that I had felt that way about any of the popes that I can remember. And I've had a pretty tortured relationship with the Catholic Church. But I used to get a lot out of it, and I really missed that when I got to the point where I couldn't even tolerate being in one because of all the hypocrisy. And Pope Leo is just such a good man. Pope Francis was too, but he had a lot of powerful enemies in the church. And I really wasn't sure if they were going to kind of go retrograde after he died and go back to another right-wing type of thing. And so I tempered I was cautious, let's just say that. They've really hit it out of the park with this new Pope. He's as one of the contributors to the comment section, I think this might have been the Atlantic, said, and it's a very astute observation. He might just be the only moral person in the world right now with power. It's really all that it's all about is right and wrong. And for those of you, any of you who are my age, or who've been through the same history as me, I'm 56 and a half. I told you back in the 80s that Ronald Reagan was bad. Bad means not a good person. Like the Reagan politics was the beginning of the devil's infiltration into America. And you should have listened to me. It comes down to this with Donald Trump. There's no hemming and hawing. There's no both sides. He's diabolical. He is evil, immoral, whatever word you want to use. There's no pussyfooting around it. And whatever the failings and shortcomings are of all the Democrats, morally speaking, it pales in comparison to his and to all of the people who've either capitulated to him for profit or are using him to further their own evil agendas. there's a lot of it. I'm really getting excited that there could be a future with the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church fell down really, really hard in my lifetime, and it was over sin, their own sins, their own immorality, ego, power, greed, selfishness, all that stuff. But that was all just people, priests, people in the church. And I've been on a little bit of a pink cloud since I started going back to church. It just sort of happened organically. I don't know exactly what came over me, but sometime in the couple of, maybe week or two after Christmas, I just felt this compulsion to go to church. I think I had been, you know what it was? I had been, something about the culture in Puerto Rico is just so different than the culture here, that there's Catholic churches that are open that you can walk into. Like back in the old days, you used to be able to do that here. Most of the churches around here now are locked up unless it's mass. But there's a lot of Catholic churches in Puerto Rico that are open for significant hours of the day for people to just come in and pray, take pictures, meditate, whatever the case may be. And the one that kept drawing me back is called San Francisco de Asís in Viejo San Juan, which means St. Francis of Assisi in Old San Juan. And it's a really, really old church, and it's got a lot of really beautiful art. And there's actually a prayer that was written by St. Francis that's posted on 8 banners going around the church. And I've kind of learned the gist of the prayer, and I've gotten into the habit of trying to say it twice a day, and it really helps me with maintaining peace and tranquility and suppressing anxiety. And so it's in Spanish that I'm saying it, because that's how it's printed in this church in Puerto Rico, and it's beautiful in Spanish. And I'm not sure if he maybe wrote it in Italian, because I think he was in Italy, right? I know he was in Italy, which is very similar. I'm learning a lot about how similar all these languages are just from listening to Pope Leo, who speaks many languages very beautifully. I mean, he's American, right? So his family's from New Orleans, and his origin is Chicago. But he was in Peru for, I think, over 20 years. So I would imagine Spanish was his primary language for 20 years. He speaks beautiful Spanish. He speaks perfect Italian and Portuguese. And he made his first trip to the Arab world, and he made his second trip to Africa. And I'm getting off the track. What was I saying about the prayer? Oh, the prayer. And so it's, if we call it 8 stanzas, each stanza begins the same. Loado seas mi Señor, which means praise be you, my Lord. And the first one is praising God for our brother, the Son. The second one, the Son, and it says a little bit of something about each of these things. Our brother, the Son, that gives us day and lights our way, something along those lines. The second one is Loado seas mi Señor, and praise be you, Lord. And this one is for our brother, the wind, and like the air. And talks about cloudiness and serenity and todo el tiempo, all time, kind of like how air moving and how it sustains life and sustains us. Particularly with the one about with the wind and the air, I associate it with music. And I realized that time and the passage of time and rhythm sound waves go through the air. It's another beautiful thing. So the third one is Loado seas mi Señor, and it's for this one's good. Nuestra. So each one is our brother or our sister, depending on whether it's a masculine or a feminine word in Spanish. So it's nuestro hermano sol, el sol, our brother the sun, our brother the wind, our sister Mother Earth, who gives us life and governs us and gives us beautiful, colorful fruits and flowers and grass. And the fourth one is Loado seas mi Señor, for nuestra hermana la muerte corporal, de cual ningún hombre viviente puede escapar. And that means, praise be you, Lord, for our sister bodily death, from which no living person can escape. And that's it for that one. And it's really kind of remarkable. And it comes right after Earth, which governs us. And death is an unavoidable part of life. And I think that flows nicely from Earth, kind of like the giver of life, Mother Earth. And there's beautiful, beautiful artwork with each of these banners. And the one, I think each one is supposed to be like a painting of St. Francis, embodying whichever of the things is that he's praising God for. So the first one is a picture of him turned up towards the sun. The second one is a picture of him kind of beholding the wind, and you can see waves of going through the air. The third one is him, I think he's crouched down to the ground and he's beholding beautiful plants that are growing out of the earth. The fourth one is him holding and comforting a dying, or I think dying, like imminently about to die, possibly just dead, but he's holding a person who's dying. And they both have halos over their heads, the person dying in there, because like we're all holy. That's all of us, right? But he's praising God for our sister, death. The next one, and this says, if you walk around the church, I don't know if I started in the right place. I started with the sun, and if you walk around the church, you're starting to turn. You're at the back when you get to. You start in the front right near the altar with the sun, and then you start going back to the wind, and then the earth, and now you're in the back left corner. Well, it's on your left now when you're facing it. You're in the back corner with our sister death. Then you go over to the other corner, and then you're going to start going back up along the other wall towards the altar again. But the first one of the last four, it doesn't say sister or brother. It just says Loado seas mi Señor por perdón y amor. And there's a few words after that, something along the lines of, and the people who forgive for your love. And I had to contemplate that one for a while. And that one in particular has actually, so the other ones have helped me with gratitude. There's the last few are also part of the gratitude, but let me get to I'll just tell you the last few. So the last three, after Perdón y Amor, it gets back to more like what you might call the natural elements. And the next one is Loado seas mi Señor, por nuestro hermano el fuego, which is robusto y fuerte y alegre, I think, or bello. I'm not sure exactly how he describes fire, but it's thanking God for fire. And every time I think of fire, like I try to visualize each thing that I'm praising God for when I say these things. And each time I do, when I'm feeling really down or overwhelmed or anxious or whatever, as soon as I start praising God for the sun and praising God for the wind, and which leads me to music and sound and all that stuff. And earth. And death is kind of like a humbling thing, and it ties in with mercy. And you get into perdón y amor. When I get to perdón y amor, whoever I'm having a problem with, which most of the time there's somebody that's causing me some stress. And I've heard people say, pray for your enemy, pray for the people that are hurting you, and it can be liberating. And I've experienced that when I try to do this little meditation. When I get the perdón y amor, I forgive whoever it is that I'm upset with, and all of a sudden the weight is lifted off my shoulders. So then fuego, when I think of fuego, there isn't usually a fire for me to look at, but there's pretty much always some kind of electric thing, or if I'm in the car when I'm doing it, driving, the internal combustion engine, any kind of invention that runs off electricity, I that at its basest element, that's fire. We had to discover fire before we could learn how to harness its power to create machines and stuff like that. The next one is Loado seas por nuestra hermana agua, water, which is humble, useful, something else, and chaste. And the last one is nuestra hermana la luna, the moon. And the stars. He encompasses the stars, which are beautiful. He uses the word beautiful. And something else. And I was I got a little mystified by the moon one, but then actually it's fitting because it's sort of mystical. And it's funny that the moon comes right after water, because the moon plays a role in the movement of water on the earth with tides. And also the moon and the stars have a lot to do with, so the moon affects, people's mental and emotional state. And that can also be tied in with mysticism and art and wonder, imagination, those kinds of things. So yeah, so that's that prayer. And I had been going to this church for quiet moments and just to behold all the beautiful art and the peace and the peace of the people coming and going through there too, and the quiet smiles and stuff like that too, and just the vibes. It's nice. When I finally just said, to myself, why don't you try going to Mass on Sunday and just see what it's like. So I did, and it was okay. It wasn't painful, and I got something out of it, and I got a bulletin, and I was looking at the bulletin and looking at the Mass schedule, and I noticed that they have a Mass every Saturday afternoon at 4 p.m. at the Capilla San Conrado in La Perla, which is the little neighborhood on the other side of the wall, between the wall of Old San Juan and the Atlantic Ocean, where I live. And I didn't know there was a chapel there. I had seen a couple of apparently defunct, like one Pentecostal and something else, but I didn't know that there was a functioning Catholic chapel there that the Franciscan friars from San Francisco de Assis come down to every Saturday and say Mass. So I found it, and I went there, and there's a decent little crowd of people from the neighborhood that go to that Mass every Saturday afternoon, and I'm kind of part of that little community now, which is really kind of cool. So, like I said, this started just sort of organically sometime in January of this year, me going to Mass every Sunday or Saturday, whichever the case may be, again. And the first time that I was not in Puerto Rico, and it was Sunday, and I hadn't been to Mass, I was in Boston. And so I looked to see where can I catch a Mass somewhere in Boston. And I was mindful, I got to be careful where I go, because if I just instinctively knew that if I pick a church that's got a congregation that are like not my kind of people, and they like their priest because he caters to them, because he's like, I'm gonna get agitated, and that's not gonna do me any good. So I got to be thoughtful about where I decide to go to Catholic Mass. So I had a pretty good idea that I could go to the Arch Street Shrine, St. Anthony's Shrine, which is also a Franciscan church in downtown Boston. It used to be kind of like the place that back when we all went to Mass every weekend. Like when I was in high school, I used to go through downtown Boston. Of course, I didn't go to high school on Saturdays and Sundays, but, I worked in town on the weekends sometimes. So it was, they have a million Masses there on Saturdays and Sundays. And, every day, but a lot of people go into that. It's in downtown Boston, and it's got a lot. It's very easy to go to Mass there. I had just arrived in Boston on Sunday late in the afternoon, and it was kind of late to where I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to catch a Mass. But I think they had a 6 p.m. Mass, or it might even have been later. But whatever the case may be, I was able to make it to that Mass, and that was okay. And then I think I've mostly been in Puerto Rico. Well, no, that's not true. So I went to Mass a few more times in Boston. I've been going to Our Lady of Lourdes in Jamaica Plain. That's where I went this morning. And Jamaica Plain is the center of the Puerto Rican community in Boston. And Our Lady of Lourdes is also the home parish of my dear, dear friend, Dawn McBride, who passed away in October at 87, just shy of his 88th birthday. And he wasn't a kid. He hadn't been going to church for, I don't think, the entire 40 years that I knew him. But he grew up in that church. He grew up in that parish. He grew up very poor in Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, in the projects. His mother was Italian and his father was Irish. But I think they used to go to that church. I think he used to go to that church with his mother when he was a child. And he spoke of that church building fondly many times and said to me how beautiful it was. And when I was working as a visiting nurse in Jamaica Plain in Roxbury, one of the 3 families that I'm still tight with, almost a year since I stopped doing that job, they go to church there, because they have a pretty active Puerto Rican community. Not just Puerto Rican, I think Dominican too, and pretty much a lot of different Hispanic groups, but a lot of Puerto Rican and Dominican in Jamaica Plain in particular. And so they have an English Mass, and they have a couple of Spanish Masses. And knowing that they go there, Maria and her daughter Rosie, I started going there, and that's been nice. And then because I spend my time in Charlestown and Everett Everett's a very diverse community too. There's a lot of Brazilians there now, but there's a lot of different, Salvadorans, probably Colombians more in East Boston, but that's right next to. There's quite a number of different Latin American countries, I'm sure, are represented in a lot of Haitians and a lot of I'm getting ahead of myself, but I went to a St. Anthony's church in Everett a few weeks ago, and the priest was Vietnamese, and there was another priest who looked like he was black, very dark. I don't think he was Haitian. I think he was African. I'm not sure which country. But they have, you look at the sign in front of their church, they've got 7 masses on Sundays, and it's 5 different languages that they have masses in every Sunday. So that mass was pretty okay too. And And I am still trying to get my. I am getting there, but I'm making progress. I'm getting close. I'm about to drive my pickup truck. I drove the big truck that's going to Puerto Rico from Boston to Florida maybe a couple of months ago. But I was thinking I had like a couple of more things that I should have put in it, so I should probably make another trip down with the pickup truck before I ship the big truck. And the couple of things turned into actually quite a few things. So the pickup truck's just about full. But I'm going to be going down to Florida with that last load tonight, I guess. But the Florida house is getting closer to me empty. It's on the market with a private exclusive, meaning the real estate agent's company has it just with them right now, but it's not on the MLS yet because we're waiting until I empty it. But I'm next few more weeks, I think. When I get to Florida, my plan is to just go straight to Puerto Rico to recover, because the drive takes a lot out of me, and I'm not much good for getting a lot of physical work done in Florida when I get there. After driving from Boston, I pretty much need like 2 days to recover. So instead of laying around Florida getting frustrated and depressed, I'm just going to go straight to Puerto Rico and chill out there, and then go back to Florida and try to really get down to brass tacks and at least get the fucking big truck ready to go to Jacksonville to get on the boat. And then we'll see about when I can finally finish getting the rest of the shit out of the house in Florida. But I think once I get the stuff that's going into the big truck there, I think it'll be like I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's what I'm hoping. But at any rate, back to the church thing, and I'm almost done with this, I guess. So Florida, I went to I've been to like three masses in Florida now, and I was very nervous about going to Catholic church in Florida because I'm in St. Petersburg, which, you know, when I first moved there in I did live there for a couple of years and worked at the VA, and then I came back to Boston, and then I spent the next few years working at Boston Medical Center still, and thinking that I was going to hopefully eventually find a house in St. Petersburg, Florida, and then change my job situation at Boston Medical Center to just work like a couple days a week and then go live in Florida. Over the course of all that, I decided I really didn't even want to be in Florida anymore, because Florida has changed a lot in the 10 years since I first started going there. And also I reached the point where I just couldn't work at the hospital anymore, but that's for another video. So, but Florida has a lot of Trumpiness, and I really can't tolerate it, and I certainly can't tolerate a church experience that caters to that mentality. So, because that's not Jesus, you know, it's not, you know, those people around Trump who call themselves Christians, like Pete Hegseth, that's Christian nationalism. That is not Christianity. That has nothing to do with Jesus. Jesus's message. You know, people who talk about, do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? That's not a question to be answered in words. That's a question to be answered in action. Do you try to put the teachings of Jesus into practice in your daily life, which is basically be humble, bitch, sit down, okay, and try to have compassion for every person, everyone. And so that's really what, and you know, and if you want to take it to the next level, you're not doing that because that's how you get into heaven. You're doing that because that's the right thing to do. It's just the right way to be. And heaven is here once you do that. That's what people don't understand. Heaven and God is love, and that's what Jesus is trying to teach. It's it's all here for us to do. If we conduct our lives the way he modeled for us, with putting other people's, caring for people, being kind, and suppressing your own selfishness and ego to try to be thoughtful and kind to others. If we all lived that way, that would be heaven. And when they say God is love, maybe that's all it means. At any rate, the first Catholic church that I went to Mass at in Florida was a church in a fairly black neighborhood, and I was hopeful that it was going to have the majority of black Americans are not Catholics, but they're Protestants of various Baptists and Methodists, right? But there was a significant number of black American Catholics as well, and a large Catholic church in a predominantly black neighborhood, I was thinking was hopefully going to have a sizable black congregation, and I just felt like I would probably stand a better chance of feeling comfortable and feeling at home in that crowd than I would with like an all-white Trump bumper sticker crowd at another neighborhood in St. Petersburg. You know what I mean? So I went to this church, St. Joseph's on 22nd Avenue South, and it was a mixed crowd. It wasn't predominantly black. It was if it was more than 50% white, but there was a fair number of black people. It wasn't a huge crowd, and it was mostly older. The priest was okay, and there was a deacon, was very, very proper, and it wasn't overly fulfilling for me, but it wasn't a real negative experience. There was one aspect of it that was difficult for me. There was a lady there that was sitting like very close to me with her husband, like in the pew ahead of me, off to the right a little bit, and she just, all the responses, she said them really, really loud and too fast in a voice that just went right up my back. And that's a me problem. I understand that, but I had trouble with that. So that was that. Then it came to be Easter. I was in St. Petersburg on Easter, and I had to figure out where to go to Mass for Easter. And I decided to go to an Easter vigil, a nighttime Mass the night before, because I just felt like, going to an Easter Sunday Mass all by myself while everybody's there all dressed up with their families, that's going to be depressing. So, and that way, I also like the idea of just getting up on Sunday morning. And I was trying to accomplish a bunch of stuff that day on Sunday, and I wanted to get up in the morning with the Mass already out of the way. So they had an Easter Vigil Mass at this church, which I had been by a million times in downtown St. Petersburg, and it's a kind of cool building. And I thought it was a Greek Orthodox church, but it's actually I think it's a Franciscan church too. But they had a mass adult baptism going on there, and there was some definite elements of, I only know this term from reading Tradcath. J.D. Vance is a convert to Catholicism, and he's part of how do we say this? I don't know what you call him, because he's such a fraud, dishonest person, and he changes, like he talks out of both sides of his mouth constantly. But to the extent that he was attracted to Catholicism, unfortunately, there's apparently a phenomenon in American Catholicism where a lot of right-wing reactionary people are being drawn towards Catholicism, sort of for all the reasons that people like me were pushed away from it. That's not the kind of people we need to rebuild our church. So thankfully, we have the right Pope who knows that and is not catering to that. And at any rate, I didn't feel it wasn't traumatic. It wasn't traumatic. We'll just say that. But it was reassuring. It reassured me that I'm doing the right thing. One more of the many reasons why leaving Florida and going to Puerto Rico instead is the right thing for me. That was good. So in between those masses at Everett, Mass, right outside of Boston, where I am, Charlestown, or Jamaica Plain when I'm up here, those two in Florida, and in between all those, every other weekend I've been in Puerto Rico, and that's where I've been either up the hill, up in Old San Juan at San Francisco or the Cecil, more often down in La Perla at the chapel on Saturday. However, a couple of weeks ago, the last time I went to Mass in Florida, I decided to try. Oh yeah, I have forgotten about this church because of that I wasn't jazzed by either of the two churches that I had been at so far. I remembered that there's a big, huge, modern look, and I don't like those modern church buildings, but I said, you know what, let me try it, because I know this neighborhood is pretty heavily black, and it's right next to Lakewood High School, and it's called Blessed Trinity Church. And I thought, you know what, maybe it'll be a big black Catholic congregation there, and maybe I'll like that. Let me try that. So I went to a Mass at Sunday morning at 10. I think it was 10, 9:30, or maybe it was 9:30. It was a weird, I don't remember, but yeah, I think they had an 8 that I had intended to go to, and I wasn't making it, so I ended up having to go to the 9:30. It was a huge crowd. It was mostly white and mostly quite old. Well, I shouldn't say mostly quite old. There was a fair number of young people too, but and there was a significant number of black people too, but it was still mostly white. But this was a much, much larger crowd than I had seen at St. Joseph's. Of course, the Easter Vigil in downtown St. Petersburg, that was a packed house, like standing room only, but that's Easter. So this was also I was surprised that there were so many Catholics there, because I don't really I think the majority of people in Florida, in that part of Florida anyway, I mean, because there's not really a big Hispanic population there, so it's either white people who, on the west coast of Florida, it seems like most of the white people are from the Rust Belt. A lot of them come from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, those places. Most of those people I thought were Protestant. And then the black people who are from there, or a lot of black people actually moved, when the Great Migration, when a lot of people had to escape Jim Crow in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi, the majority did go north, but a fair number of people went to Florida too, because Florida had its own problems with Jim Crow, don't get me wrong, but I think there were areas of Florida that were safer for black people back then than some of the places they were fleeing. And then there's always just been native population in Florida. So, but most of those people are also not Catholic. So I was just surprised that there were so many Catholics there. But this crowd definitely looked like the type of people who watch Fox News. I mean, I have some additional information that caused me to think that, primarily how the priest conducted himself, but so this priest really kind of set me off. Now, mind you, this Sunday Mass happened a few days, no more than a couple or 3 days after Donald Trump had, he does all of his communication on his quote-unquote Truth Social Twitter clone that he created or paid for, whatever, his own social media thing, which unfortunately the mainstream media just dutifully reports to us every single thing he put on his. It would be nice if just nobody fucking paid any attention. Like, fuck you, write whatever you want, spit it out into the void. Nobody's fucking paying attention to you. but you know, they tell us every fucking thing he says on Truth Social all the time. So we all have to find out. So this was after he had launched this war on Iran, and it was like a couple weeks in, I think, and he was starting to get very agitated that I think they had already closed the Strait of Hormuz, and none of them saw that coming, right? So he was starting to get agitated that they weren't just like ready to cut a deal and make peace. And he posted this. I mean, it's really hard to keep up with the fire hose of information, but he basically, this is the one where he used the word fuck. He said, you crazy fucking bastards, or something like that. And he said, I will wipe out your entire civilization. Those type of, like, just maniacal, insane, just abject evil, okay? So Pope Leo, without speaking his name, without being drawn into any kind of a back and forth, he did what he had to do because it's his duty. He spoke out to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, of love and humility and compassion, and speaking up to condemn evil, especially when it's coming from a place of power. So he said his piece, and Trump got triggered by that and then attacked Pope Leo personally on social media. And then J.D. Vance, the designated spokesperson for American Catholics, which the press in America keeps saying J.D. Vance, a Catholic, as though he represents all of us, and instead of just saying J.D. Vance, formerly J.D. Hamill, formerly J.D. Bowman, formerly not a Catholic, a recent Catholic convert, all this stuff. Had the gall to say, he tries to act like, well, Donald is, he's the king, so all praise to him. But, he's a little loopy, and I'm the genteel one, so I'll say it in a more genteel way. In his genteel way, he had the temerity to say that what Pope Leo should stick to and not be speaking about. He should not speak about the immorality of political leaders, and he should not speak up to counter the evil things that they say. So, I know Fox News and the entertainment media empires that profit, these whores that profit off of sowing all this mental chaos, they turn this into a Pope Leo and Donald Trump are having a battle. Pope Leo is not having a battle with Donald Trump. He's above that. This priest, I already didn't like his vibe, the way he spoke and the way he carried himself and his intonations, and he just, I really didn't care for him, but I hadn't thought, I'm just trying to just get through Mass and keep an open mind. But you get to the homily, which is after the gospel, when they come out and they give a sermon. In Protestant, they say sermon. In Catholic, they say homily. But it's a talk, he gives his little, whatever he wants to say, basically. And it's supposed to be an elaboration of the gospel story, that whatever it was for that weekend. But sometimes they've got something in the news that they want to talk about, and it's got nothing to do with whatever the gospel is that weekend. It's just that this is the issue of the day, and this is what they're going to talk about. So he comes down from the lectern after reading the gospel, and he stands out in front of the altar like he's coming into the crowd, like Phil Donahue. And he's a big, tall guy. He's an older guy, you know, probably 70, late 60s, 70. He's wearing sandals. I don't know what he's wearing underneath that, the rest of the stole that he's wearing, but I could see he's wearing sandals. But he's got this, I just didn't like the way he carried himself at all. But he immediately launches into, so the president and the Pope apparently had a little conflict this week, and there's some chuckles amongst the white hair crowd in the very packed congregation here of people who, like I said, are just accustomed to having Fox News playing all the time. Maybe this priest is too, I don't know. But I know from the way he spoke that he didn't just, so I get the source material from, I skim newspaper stories and I get the New York Times posts, this is what President Trump wrote on Truth Social, and then I see what Pope Leo says on Instagram. That's it. I don't listen to Tucker Carlson's take or Sean Hannity's take or any columnist in the Atlantic. I read some of the columnists in the Atlantic's takes, but I don't really agree with them. So this priest definitely had a packaged version of what actually happened, because as far as he's just taken the narrative of that they're having a personal conflict with, which is what Trump is trying to do, but Pope Leo's not doing that. And the only thing beyond his statements, which didn't single out any head of state or any individual by name, beyond his statements, the only other thing he did was he took a couple of questions from reporters on the plane where they asked him about Trump's attacks against him, which were in response to his words of reminding us what Jesus taught us and how Trump's threats, without saying Trump, are the polar opposite of godly love as taught and modeled by Jesus. It's like, he didn't say the devil. He's been talking about the devil, thankfully, which is good, but he didn't bring it up in that instance. But, you know, he's asked by reporters on the plane about Donald Trump's attack against him afterwards. And he asks a direct question, are you afraid? And he says, no, I'm not afraid of. Because they asked him, he might have said, no, I'm not afraid of Donald Trump, or no, I'm not afraid of the Trump administration, or something like that. But his response was very measured, grace, not looking to add fuel to the fire, but also not backing down at all, because there is no backing down from, you know, right is right and wrong is wrong. And that's the problem, is that people the whole fucking world is trying to change the definition of right and wrong to accommodate Donald Trump and his evil cabal. You can't, right and wrong doesn't change. So the Pope isn't backing down on right and wrong, but he's not looking to have because that's ego, and he knows that. He's such a good person. Oh my God. So the priest gets up there and he says, so I guess, so he immediately, he's buying the angertainment narrative and sort of ratifying it, that the Pope and the president are in conflict. And he's playing to a pro-Trump crowd, and it's palpably obvious to me that that's what he's doing. And the next thing he does is he says, you know, any of the statements, this priest says this, any of the statements that Pope Leo made this week were not made with infallibility. You know, before that, he says, you know, we're all humans, and none of us except Jesus and Mary are perfect. He says, I'm certainly not. Oh, like we thought you might have been. And And that's when he goes on to, he says, and none of the statements that Pope Leo made this week were made with infallibility. And papal infallibility is a church doctrine that purports to say that, that says that at certain points in time, the Pope can speak, and God is speaking through the Pope in a way that whatever the Pope says that's the truth. It's coming directly from God. The Pope can't make a mistake when he's speaking with papal infallibility. I don't get bothered anymore I fully understand now that most of the church doctrine and rules of the church were made up by people, and if I don't like it, I'm very, very secure in, I have been since I was a child, what's right and what's wrong. And I was at a tremendous loss when the church got so wrong that I couldn't get anything from the church anymore. But the church is kind of like the only thing left right now that's good, and it's trying to come back. And it's given me something. So I'm really grateful and happy for that. But this Mass in Florida was a reminder that there's a lot of people in the church, still, priests, who are not good. And weak. That's one thing. It's anyway. So he starts by endorsing that there's a conflict, which sort of denigrates the Pope to some extent, because the Pope is not engaged in the battle, and he's not brawling with the president the way the media is trying to portray it. The president's trying to do that, but the Pope is not taking it. So he endorses that false narrative to open his little spiel. He then goes on to say that nobody except Jesus and Mary is perfect, which is his setup for telling us that the Pope is not perfect. And to be fair, I guess he's also saying that Donald Trump is not perfect. But I mean, God almighty, you're supposed to be speaking about Jesus and the gospel. There's no two ways about it. Never mind perfect. You're hard-pressed not to say that he's up there doing the work of the devil the way he conducts himself. So, but this guy knows that he's preaching to a Trump crowd, and he may even be part of it himself. I don't know. But he goes on to say that the Pope was not speaking with infallibility during any of the stuff that he said last week. So at this point, I'm sitting on the edge of my pew, about to get up and leave, because I'm realizing that I'm about to, there's over 200 people in this church, and I have all I can do not to stand up in my pew and counter this guy. And I don't want to do that. So I'm thinking I'm going to need to leave. And I'm just waiting to see what he's going to say next, to see if it's going to allow me to settle down and sit back in my pew. And when he says that the Pope didn't speak with infallibility in anything he said, that's going to be a setup that he's going to attack something that the Pope said. There's nothing that the Pope said could if you can't just stand up as a priest after this good Pope reminds us, without saying Donald Trump's name, that what Donald Trump is doing is evil, what he is saying is evil, and as a reminder, this is what Jesus wants us to do. This is what Jesus teaches us. This is the way of love. This is the way. That's his job as our shepherd, to speak up about that. If you can't just back him up on that, just go home. But I was on the edge of my seat when he started with the setup that that the Pope didn't speak with any infallibility, and I was waiting to just see what he was going to say. And he goes, well, here's my thing. They're both right. And at that point, I can't stay any longer to wait and hear how you're going to tell me that Donald Trump is right. How are you going to tell me that Donald Trump, who just initiated an unprovoked war at the behest of Israel, most likely, right? And people are dying now as a result of this, and the world is in turmoil. We're increasing hatred and and now he's threatening to wipe out an entire civilization with just out of control profanity. And you're going to say they're both right? So I stood up, and I had to get past a few people in the pew to get out, and I was trying to be very polite, and I didn't want to. I was fuming, but I just said, "Excuse me," I kind of like said, "I'm sorry" to the person as I was stepping past them to go, and I walked to the back of the church, and there's an usher at the back of the church, a black man with an accent. I don't know, maybe African. I think African, this one. No, he might have been an islander. I'm not sure. But anyway, he's standing outside the closed doors. I think he's like a greeter. So I had to leave, and I walked through I swung through the doors, and he's standing there, and I just said, I can't listen. I can't listen to this guy. I can't listen to this making excuses for evil Donald Trump. And he says, kind of like painedly, he says, "I know, he always has to make everything so political. I'm sorry, brother." And I said, "That's okay." And he said, "Blessings to you." I said, "Blessings to you too." And I left. So then I drove away, and I didn't get, that was my mass. So I didn't get to stay through the communion or any of that stuff that week. And I was too upset to try to go find another church. And that was it for me for that whole day. But I went to try to do some other things, and I was kind of shaken, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I said, I need to go back and speak to that guy. So I did. I went back, and I got there, and I saw that the whole parking lot was still full, and the mass wasn't over. And I was like, damn. So I kind of drove around the block again, and then when I got back, I could see that people were starting to come out. So I parked my car, and I walked back to the church doors where the people were coming out, and I walked through the outer doors into the space between the outer door and the inner door where the priest was standing and saying goodbye to people. And at the moment that I got there, he was blessing some kind of trinkets that somebody had given him to ask him to bless them for him. And I stood there waiting for that to be done. And when it was done, he looked up, and I looked at him, and I said, I wish I could remember if I said shame on you or you ought to be ashamed of yourself. I think I said you ought to. I know I didn't say how dare you. It was something to do with the word shame. Maybe I said shame on you for standing up there in that pulpit and trying to, and I know I said, and mitigating the evil of Donald Trump. And I meant to say minimizing, but I know that the word that came out of my mouth was mitigating. I said, shame on you for standing up there in that pulpit and mitigating the evil of Donald Trump and undermining our Holy Father. And he started to cut me off before I got all that out, but I continued talking to get all that out while he was trying to cut me off. And he tried to put his hand on me, and he was like, let's have this conversation some other time, some other place. Let's talk about this another time. And it was a lot of people was kind of coming out of the church, so they were partying around us and stopping and gawking at me and stunned. People in Florida are very deferential to authority in general. The kids all call me sir. It's just like natural for them to accept authority, it's cute and endearing in some ways, but it's also why they go for just absolute corrupt authoritarians like Governor Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, because they're just too deferential to positions of authority. So there was a Asian, I hate the word Asian because it doesn't tell you anything. India is in Asia, so Oriental, we'll say. This girl might have been like, she was tall, but I think she looks like she's Thai. She was an usher at the downtown church on Easter Vigil night, and she handed me my program when I walked in, and I noticed her throughout the whole mass standing in the outer area looking through the glass, and she was very, had a lot of makeup on, and she's pretty, very skinny, well, prettily dressed and everything, very, very like anxious and like on high alert bearing about her, the way she looks all the time. She was that way on Easter Vigil. I didn't even realize she was in this Blessed Trinity Mass, but she was the only person who actually spoke to me while the priest said, he tried to say, let's do this somewhere else. And I said no. And he goes, have you ever been to this church before? I said no, and I'm never coming back to this church. That's why I need to tell you this now. And he says, well, you don't know anything about what I say if you've never been to this church. I said, I know what I heard you say today. And I said, I don't think I really said much more than I don't think I really repeated it myself. And I just know that I said the gist of it was, oh, I know. The other thing I said, so I first spoke, I said, shame on you for standing up there in that pulpit and trying to mitigate the evil of Donald Trump and undermining our Holy Father. And then he tried to cut me off. And I said, your job is to tell this congregation what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, just so that you can get a couple of chuckles out of them. And I said something about Fox News. I said, your job is to tell the congregation what they need to hear, not what you think they want to hear, so you can get a couple of chuckles out of a Fox News crowd or something, out of Fox News cult members, I think I said. At that moment, I noticed this girl who I had seen, who had handed me the program at the other church a few weeks before, standing right beside the priest now. She had come up from behind him, and she was almost like getting between, trying to sort of like to the side of him, between me and him. And she was horrified, and she kind of raised her voice, and she said, that's very disrespectful. And I don't think I really said anything else after that. I just put my hands up like I said my piece, and I turned around to leave. And at that moment that I was turning around to leave, the black guy who had blessed me and sort of commiserated with me about how this priest gets very political all the time and he doesn't like it either, he was also kind of lunging through the crowd to physically remove me. And he put his hands on me as I was leaving. I didn't respond at all physically. I just kind of like, I'm not here to fight, and I made it quite clear that I was leaving. So the contact was infinitesimally brief, and that was that. And that was, I haven't told anybody about that yet. But it took a lot out of me, or I don't know if that's the right thing. It made a big impact on me that was not good. It shook me up. It shook me up a lot, that experience. But when I did my St. Francis prayer and I got to Perdón y Amor, I prayed for that priest. And I've done that a few times since then, and I feel a lot better. So that's it for now. I'm going to put something on Instagram today about the new bishop. He's not new, sorry. I think he's the Archbishop of the Bronx or the Archbishop of New York City. Joseph S. I don't know how to say this name. He's Dominican. He's born in New York City, but his parents are Dominican. Espaillat. It looks like a French. There's a lot of Dominicans that have French names between the Haitian and French border. He's very Dominican looking, but Espaillat. I don't know how you say it, but I first found out about this guy when I saw him speaking at Willie Colon's funeral, which he presided over a couple of months ago. But apparently he's been the Archbishop of New York since 2022, I think. He's phenomenal. And Pope Leo also just appointed a new bishop who's from New Orleans, to be a archbishop or bishop, I'm not sure the difference, in Washington, D.C., who has been very vocal in speaking out against this racist anti-DEI campaign of the Project 2025 people that Trump is allowing to implement everything through his administration. And also a new bishop that Pope Leo just appointed to, and that guy's black, the Washington, D.C. guy's light-skinned, but he's going to be the youngest bishop now. And I think prior to that, this guy in New York that I'm going to put on a little later today was the youngest. But he also just named the new bishop for the whole state of West Virginia, who is a migrant from El Salvador who came to the United States in a trunk of a car and worked janitorial work and construction and everything else. And he comes off, I saw him speak as a real sincere, humble person who's been very vocal in pastoral care and advocacy for our migrant brothers and sisters that are being persecuted by this regime. So there's lots and lots of good signs between the Pope Leo's outreach to the Muslim world in his Middle East trip and his anti-racism efforts too, with his outreach in Africa, and just the beautiful love that he's showing and modeling for us, for all people. That's what we need. So don't try to make excuses for Donald Trump or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or Tim Cook or Sundar Pichai or Leonard Leo or any of these, Tucker Carlson, the Supreme Court, all the Republicans, and the Democrats have a lot of corruption. Holding on to power is the primary thing too, but I'm getting far afield. But don't try to make any excuses for this MAGA world stuff that the whole thing has to crumble, and the leaders need to be ostracized. You know, if you can be a true, it's so when you're when you partake in evil, you can be redeemed, but you have to repent in order to be redeemed. The masses who fell for this are mostly not, I mean, we're all sinners, right? They're mostly not abject evil. They're mostly just, ignorant sounds patronizing, but that's the quickest way to say it. They were fooled. We need to embrace them all, and everybody needs to get back together as the human race. But the leaders, they're not going to just act like, oh, whoops, never mind, we're still in charge and now we're good. So we need to be very clear. Good and evil are real things. The devil is real, and right now he's trying to run the world. And thank God we got a really, really good Pope. And if we could just figure out how to get all the Protestant churches back together with the Catholic Church, and maybe even something with Islam too, I mean, we could really make some progress. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. I stumbled across a very inspiring Baptist preacher from 12th Baptist Church in Roxbury a few weeks ago, and I'm anxious to go to that church and see him in person. And the Reverend Dr. William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign is doing a lot of great work too. I don't really know a lot about Islam. I know that there's a lot of really evil heads of state and heads of syndicates in the Muslim world, and there's just a lot of bloodlust, and I know about that. But my personal experience with the Muslim people that I have met, The majority are just good, humble, regular people. And there's such a tremendous potential for just good, decent, humble people. Together to overcome evil. And we'll leave it at that for now. Come back with another installment soon. That'll be my goal. All right, take care.